All right, today we're going to pull back the curtain on one of the most famous periods in science. And it's a story that, honestly, it pretty much reshapes how you think about progress and where big ideas really come from. You've probably heard this line before, right? It's from Isaac Newton, one of the biggest names from the scientific revolution. It's a great way of saying that, science always builds on what came before. And when we think about those giants, a few names pop up immediately. Galileo, Copernicus, and of course, Newton himself. These are the guys we're taught basically invented a new way of understanding the universe based on evidence. But that brings up a really important question, doesn't it? If they were standing on the shoulders of giants, well, whose shoulders were they? Who were the thinkers that gave them that incredible vantage point?
To find the answer, we actually have to rewind the clock. We're going back centuries before the scientific revolution in Europe to what's often called the Islamic Golden Age.
And right at the center of this era was a place called the House of Wisdom in Baghdad. Now, this wasn't just some dusty old library. Think of it as the world's most advanced research university and think tank, all rolled into one, attracting the sharpest minds on the planet.
And here's the amazing part. It was a true global hub. Scholars there didn't just collect texts. They translated, debated, and mashed up knowledge from everywhere. Greece, India, Persia, China. They were blending all this ancient wisdom to create something totally new.
So, out of this incredible melting pot of ideas came scholars who didn't just save old knowledge, they actually forged brand new tools for science. Tools that would eventually make their way to Europe and change everything. So let's start with this guy, Al-Khwarizmi. He was a Persian mathematician at the House of Wisdom, and he was tackling a huge problem: how to make really complex math practical for everyday people. His most famous book gave us the word algebra. It comes from the Arabic al-jab, which means restoring or balancing. But even bigger than that, he created these step-by-step procedures for solving problems. And you know what we call those today? Algorithms. The word is literally a Latin version of his own name. Now, the way he did this was absolutely transformative. He popularized the Hindu-Arabic numerals, the numbers we use today, including the game-changing idea of zero. Seriously, can you imagine trying to do long division with Roman numerals? It's a total nightmare. Al-Khwarizmi gave science the toolkit it desperately needed.
But this revolution wasn't just happening in math. Let's switch gears to chemistry, where an innovator named Jabir ibn Hayyan, who was known in Europe as Geber, was making this massive leap. He pushed this idea that for his time was just completely radical. He said you have to prove things with your own two hands through experiments. It wasn't about just believing what some ancient authority wrote in a book. It was about testing ideas out in the real world. That is the bedrock of all modern chemistry.
And this focus on experimentation brings us to our last innovator, Ibn al-Haytham. He used this very principle to completely change our understanding of how we see, our most basic connection to the world around us.
His work is just a perfect example of this new way of thinking. For more than 1,000 years, everyone believed that our eyes worked by shooting out invisible rays. Ibn al-Haytham thought, that doesn't sound right. So he proved it was wrong, using experiments with a dark room, a camera obscura, to show that light actually bounces off things and comes into our eyes. So what it all boils down to is his core philosophy. He basically argued that a true scientist has to be a skeptic, to question and test every single thing they read. I mean, that's it right there. That's the scientific method hundreds of years before it became the standard in Europe.
Okay, so we've got these incredible, game-changing ideas: algebra, experimental proof, the scientific method itself. But how on earth did they travel from places like Baghdad and Cairo all the way to the thinkers of the European Renaissance?
Well, it wasn't overnight. It was a long, slow relay race of knowledge. For centuries, these books and ideas were copied and spread along trade routes. Take Ibn al-Haytham's Book of Optics. It was written around 1021, but it wasn't translated into Latin for almost 200 years. And when it was, it set off a firestorm of new thinking in Europe, long before Copernicus was even born. And this is where it all clicks into place. We can finally start to connect the dots and see that the famous giants of the scientific revolution weren't working in a bubble. They were the next runners in this long chain of discovery. I mean, just look at how direct these connections are. The math that Copernicus and Kepler used, it was built right on top of Al-Khwarizmi's work. The experimental approach that Galileo and Bacon became famous for, pioneered by Ibn al-Haytham.
Even Newton himself studied the chemical works that came from Jabir ibn Hayyan.
And let this sink in. 500. Ibn al-Haytham was using and promoting the scientific method, hypothesize, test, question everything, about 500 years before it became the gold standard in Europe. Just incredible.
So why does all this matter? It does more than just add a few new names to the history books. It really changes our entire perspective on how science even works.
The big takeaway here is that science has never belonged to one culture or one country or one period in time. It's always been a global relay race where the baton of knowledge gets passed from one civilization to the next, all of it fueled by the same basic human curiosity.
And that leaves us with one final thought. If giants like Ibn al-Haytham and al-Khwarizmi could be overlooked for so long, who are the invisible giants of today? Who are the scientists and thinkers out there right now whose shoulders the next generation will stand on, but whose names we might not even know yet?